And now we're going to have a conversation with Alice Zheng, who's a partner with Foreground Capital. And hopefully there she is. Welcome.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're quite welcome. Thank you. And as if you were listening, you could see that these don't always follow the plan to fit in the time. So we'll have a conversation for interesting things as long as it takes. How's that? I promise. Tell us first a little bit about Foreground Capital. Just who do you represent, and what's the thesis, if you will, of your group, and then we could talk about you and your journey.
Sure. Yes. And thank you again for having me and elevating the topic of women's health. That's really my life's work, and very excited to share more with this group today. As for Foreground Capital, we are an early stage venture capital fund that's investing exclusively in women's health. By women's health, we define that as areas that are specific to women, different in women, and affecting women disproportionately. And we invest across all healthcare segments, including the life sciences, as well as health services, health tech, digital health, et cetera. We actually spun out last fall from RH Capital and are still managing RH Capital's Fund 1 and 2. So in total, we have about 23 companies we've invested in, including one exit, which makes us one of the largest women's health portfolios out there in the venture capital space.
Well, thank you. That's a nice synopsis, and I appreciate it. The thing that I'm most curious about, and I'll put it into context, at every point in my life, as I sort of stopped and took stock of where I was and what I was doing, I was always surprised where I ended up. And so in a sense, my philosophy today is I'm where I'm supposed to be, even though I didn't know it. So
Love that.
So I got to where I needed to be, but I didn't know that I was there during the journey. So that's the context. You've got a really interesting and diverse background in clinical medicine, consulting, and global health and venture capital. So you've had an interesting journey as well. And I'm curious about how that journey and your specific insights and experience have shaped this perspective on women's health.
Sure. Absolutely. And I love what you just said. I don't think I would have ever imagined being in this position 20 years ago. When I was in college, I was very much skeptical of the private sector and really wanted a career fully in public health or medicine, and did not have to be here. So I completely agree with what you just said. If I look back at my journey, in many ways, I'm a very curious student. So when I was in public health and medicine, I was curious about the business sector and jumped deep in there. And then when I was in consulting, I was curious about venture. And so there's just been a series of different changes and pivots, largely driven by, I would say, curiosity and curiosity, I would say, and just around how else can we leverage different tools to make an impact? I would say what is the consistent driving force is a notion around how to serve underserved groups, whether it's using a public health tool or using a clinical medicine tool, or now, as a venture capitalist, how can we leverage innovation and funding those innovations to drive change? And also what I'll say is within that, I've always been drawn to underserved groups. So in my public health days, I was working in East Africa, without running water at times and no electricity. And women's health is that underserved issue within the private sector. It's an area that has been historically underfunded, underinvested in, and yet has significant need, both clinical need and large populations. And there's also a component of gender equity. So all of that makes it very exciting. To answer your question on how have those different perspectives shaped my thoughts today, absolutely. I bring all of the different hats into my work, evaluating and supporting innovation. The clinician perspective allows me to read clinical papers and scientific papers and understand them and speak that language, and also have the mindset of how a clinician might think about adopting new technology and what are the uphill battles these clinicians are facing in the status quo. As a consultant, I worked with many Fortune 500 companies in women's health and beyond, and so have sort of that language and that perspective around how are those big companies thinking about innovation and women's health. And other perspectives, such as the public health experience, help me think about taking a step back from the business side and the financial return. What does this actually mean for healthcare more broadly and the impact on individual lives as well as at the population level? And I've also had the patient lived experience as well. And I don't think you have to have a lived experience to invest in a sector, but certainly it gives me a different perspective. And there are certain areas that I will just have a little more just deeper experience in as well. Aside from those different perspectives, I would say network is a big piece of it. And for anyone who's traversed different terrains in their career, I'm sure you can appreciate that the networks in different places, it's great to bring those along with you because, in any given role, in any given space, those can be very helpful, such as my medical school friends. They're all different specialties now. I can reach out to them and ask different questions about what they're seeing and how innovations relate, et cetera. I'll pause there.
Well, so I love your enthusiasm and your passion. Thank you. We are all recipients of healthcare, in a sense that and I grew up in a world where healthcare was fix me when I'm broken. I didn't think much about it. I didn't take care of myself. All I knew is that when I needed help, I could go get it. So I'm curious if your experience as a patient has influenced your perspective and focus on advocating for women's health.
Yep, absolutely. I have again, not planned, experience many different parts of women's health as a patient, and that includes everything from infertility to difficult pregnancies to pregnancy termination even. And I would say the biggest shock I had as a patient was just how little I understood about the patient experience, even though I was a provider in all of those same areas. I had actually done extra rotations to learn even more about each of those spaces. And yet there were many parts of the patient experience that I did not expect and was never taught in medical school. And what I realized is when you're in medicine, you're taught to treat the areas that have, lasting morbidity, mortality, kind of like, serious medical impact. But the patient experience, there's a lot more to that. There's things that that may or may not happen that have a big change on your quality of life and your mental health, but your clinical provider may not be focused on that because it's not, driving the, clinical outcomes. So that was definitely a shock and a learning for me and does give me more resolve and commitment to the women's health space. I will say that I was committed to the space even before that, before the experiences, just on the grounds of unmet clinical need, business opportunity, gender equality and all of that. And, one thing I do want to highlight is, women's health is important for many different reasons. And I do think that the conversation is shifting in good ways. There's a lot of really important impact that we can have within women's health on entire societies and health systems and, women and their families and all of that. And so there's a lot of those reasons to be in women's health, but we shouldn't miss the point that is also a business opportunity as well. And I say this because sometimes I meet men who are in the space and they're a little bit apologetic. I don't have the experience, that's how they feel. But actually, I say, you don't have to have diabetes to invest in or innovate in diabetes. You don't need to have cancer to invest in oncology. These are areas that people universally recognize as clinical opportunities, financial opportunities. And it's the same for women's health. So it's a cherry on top if there's lived experience and there's that kind of deeper kind of personal commitment. But I absolutely do not think it is it is not necessary. It is nice, but not necessary for both innovators and investors.
Well, you're an extraordinarily passionate advocate for women's health. I mean, and that comes through even in the kind of the limitations of virtual connectedness that we live in today. And so your excitement for the field is contagious. I'm curious, what changes do you hope to see in the next 5 to 10 years that will be specifically useful for women's health? Because you made a very good point that there are gender specific and gender different needs. And so I'm curious what you see as the next 5 to 10 years bringing and how that's going to begin to get a little balance.
Yep. Yeah, I would say, women's health has come very far in the past, call it 5 to 7 years, where innovation has really taken off. And I expect and would love to see that continue. And I mean that in a few different ways. There's been much more increased public awareness, and that's been really exciting to see across all area of women's health. And I do think that it is expanding. In the early days, the conversations were very much around reproduction, meaning, fertility and maternal health. Menopause became a very hot topic over the past couple of years, which is something possibly unimaginable to some who weren't even able to talk to their doctors about it. That's changing. And where I see women's health going in the future is the conversation expanding even more beyond female-specific conditions, as in, women's biology, but really other things that affect the health of women, such as heart health, autoimmune health, and lots of these other areas that actually drive significant morbidity and mortality among women. So that kind of awareness and conversation is one shift that I see. We've seen a lot more investment as well in women's health. Of course, this is against the backdrop of a boom in VC, and now we're in a correction phase. So women's health is facing the same tailwinds that the rest of, healthcare innovation is facing. I have hope that we have hit the bottom of that and we're on our way back up. Just anecdotally, I'm experiencing that, and we'll see what PitchBook and other sources say about investment levels overall. But my sense is, hopefully we're kind of turning the corner now, and so in 5 to 10 years, I very much expect to be in a different part of that cycle. And I don't know that we'll ever reach 2021 levels of kind of the COVID observed like low interest rate era of innovation and investment, or of investment. Not that innovation will not rise, but the investment piece of it would really peak then. I don't know if we'll get quite to that level, but I do expect to be in a different place than where we are right now. And that also means, more and more startups being formed, tackling these really important issues, and more investors as well. 3 to 5 years ago, there were very few funds dedicated to women's health. We are one of the few. There's a growing number now of specialized funds, as well as funds that are spending time in adjacent areas like care economy or all things women, as well as generalists. What's really important is that these larger generalist funds that can write the later stage investments are also spending time here, and I only see that growing as we continue.
Thank you very much. Your influence is very, very much needed across the world of innovation and healthcare, and specifically your focus on women's health. So I want to thank you for that, number one, and say, Ainsley, one more time, we needed more time.
Thank you so much for highlighting this topic.
You're
and if
quite
anyone wants
welcome.
to connect on the topic, please find me on LinkedIn. I'm all ears.
Great. Take care.
Okay, thank you.